Hey everyone, this is Stephen Roddy, co-founder of Modern BeautyCon, and I'm here with Mr. CO Alex Lertzman of Corral Data. They literally corral your data. And if you're not familiar, Corral Data, it's HIPAA compliant AI analytics platform that helps med spas unify their data, optimize operations, and most importantly, boost profitability without requiring any kind of data engineering and expertise. So if your eyes feel like you're slightly glazing over with that, we have Alex here. He's going to break it down for us and like how you can use both Corral Data and just data in general to boost the profitability of your med spa. So Alex, welcome to the call.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah. Okay. So why is it so important for med spa owners to understand data and to leverage their data in today's market?
I mean, I think it's getting to be a very hyper-competitive environment, right, to begin with. But I think what we've seen, at least on our end, med spas that use data to make smart decisions, they could do everything from acquiring the right customers, not just customers, figuring out figuring out services that they should be not just providing but also pitching, figuring out their messaging. So like all of these things allow you to really optimize your business. And I think what we've seen is either it's med spa sort of private equity roll-ups or even groups or even single practices, when they are using data to make smart decisions, obviously they can have a competitive edge, right? And I think that's how we think about this, is data is their competitive edge.
I was going down the street. Our med spas, my wife and I's med spa is located in a place called Danvers, Massachusetts. And I went to Home Depot to get something, and there's already like 5 med spas within a 10-mile radius of us. And I was driving down, I'm like, oh my, there's another one. And it was maybe a mile and a half away from where we are. I'm like, oh my gosh. And I can remember my buddy who's a physical therapist. He's like, when I first got into the industry, he's like, these like physical therapy clinics were popping up everywhere. And then VC money moved in, private equity came in and started taking over. And he still has just a single location, but for med spas, that is what is happening to the industry as a whole. So when you say data, a lot of times people think about like Google Analytics, website clicks, data, but break this down. Like, what kind of data should med spas be tracking regular to make smarter business decisions?
Yeah, so I think like a lot of it is, yes, there's data that lives in Google Analytics, which is an amazing place to start, but also a lot of data lives in your EMR, your Zenoti, your Mevo, your Boulevard, your Patient Now, right? So you have all of this patient data in there. You also have a lot of data that lives in your ad platforms if you're advertising your business. So Meta, Google Ads, Instagram ads, right? That's obviously driving traffic to your website, and maybe you'll see some of that in your Google Analytics. But then does that person actually end up showing up, right? So if they show up, great. You might sort of see that appointment, but that lifetime value and all of that data, that lives in your EMR system. Cost data lives inside of your ad platforms, and your visit data lives inside of Google Analytics. So what we recommend doing is obviously how do you bundle all of that data together, or how do you corral all of your data together so you could have that full view. And I think where we sort of start to look at the most fastest growing med spas on our platform, they are obsessed with a few key metrics, but one of them is lifetime value over customer acquisition costs. So what they're optimizing towards is, what is the lifetime value that this specific campaign generated or this initial service generated, right? That's how they're optimizing their business, because otherwise you're acquiring customers that might or might not show up. They might book an appointment on your website, but do they end up showing up for a visit? And then how much do they end up spending, right? But if you have all of that data together, and that's just one example of LTV to CAC against campaign, but you could do that for pretty much anything that you're doing. Like, who's the first therapist, right? So like, who's that injector that provided them with that amazing service that drives high LTV? All of that data being together in one platform. That's how we sort of think about where the opportunity to optimize is.
So, I mean, the two things that we really track is lifetime value, which is a bit of a moving target because every time that person comes back, their lifetime value, goes up. But then we also track pre-book rates. I think it's interesting what you said about tracking the actual provider, which we don't do. Like, where did this person start their journey? Because let's say you have four providers, and you, Susan, who maybe doesn't, she's your esthetician, so maybe she's not making the most per hour, but for some reason, when people start their journey with Susan, they get deeply integrated into getting fillers next or getting a laser treatment. So like that person starts on that journey in the med spa. So Susan on the surface doesn't make a whole lot of money for your med spa, but when you take and you use something like Corral data, all of a sudden Susan is your MVP because she's like really assisting other people. Is that what your software does?
Exactly. But also, like, you could say that about Susan, but you could say that about what is that first keyword that they searched, right?
Mm,
And that keyword ends up sort of generating the highest amount of lifetime value. But on the face of it, you're like, well, the conversion rate of that keyword is low.
yeah.
So I think the way that we think about this is you are sitting on a gold mine of data that is in all of these disparate systems. If you're
Mm,
able to, whether you use Corral data or even if you do sort of back of the envelope math on a Google Sheet, but if you're able to sort of isolate that entire journey from beginning to end, that's where you can that's where you can start to not just see what happened in the past, you can start to predict the future. And the next piece of that is we allow our customers to also say, what is the correlation between us running this email campaign and future revenue? What is the correlation between the esthetician that they first saw and future LTV? So that's the other piece of this is we have all of this data so we can also predict things. And then lastly, to answer your question about the moving target, it is a moving target. There's two ways that you could handle this. One is just look at the past 90-day LTV. So it's always static, right? That's always your last 90 days of LTV. The other way is just look at cohorts. So when did all the people that started in January, all the people that started in February, in specific month.
mm. Well, if you're tracking, let's say the keyword, are you really able to say like Stephen Roddy, Google this keyword, booked an appointment with Susan? Because like how I understand, like once I get into the booking software, I'm like Stephen Roddy, Susan, filler, LTV. How do you back it up to Google Analytics to connect what I'm searching with the booking?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when you first click onto any ad, what ends up happening is where you're passing what's usually either a G-Click ID or a Facebook ID that says this is the ad. This is the ad that somebody just came through, and
Hmm.
typically what will happen. Let's say you're using Zenoti, but you could sort of use
Yeah.
any system. Is it will fire off if you have this set up correctly. And usually we work with our customers if they don't have it set up, we'll help them set this up. But what it will usually do is it will fire off a tracking pixel that says, hey, this person just came from this G-Click ID or this Facebook ID, and we've recorded this ad click in our platform. So we have all of this EMR data, this patient data inside of your EMR system. Now what we can do is we can marry that G-Click ID or that Facebook Click ID or any ad platform Click ID back to the ad platform by joining that together in a HIPAA compliant way. So what we're doing is we're pulling in that data that you might not care about in, let's say, Zenoti, and we're merging that data together with your ad platform to say that was the actual campaign ad group keyword that generated not just a click, which you will see in Google Analytics, but also did they show up and how much did they spend, and joining that together. And you can
Yeah.
also have call tracking data as well if you're
Mm,
using line or call rail or call tracking metrics or any of those.
yeah. Okay, so I'm going to ask two questions because I can almost feel the people on watching, even though it's pre-recorded, them thinking like, oh my, like their eyes rolling in the back of their head. They're like, okay, I've got patients, I'm a solopreneur, or I'm self-managing all these things, I'm working all these hours. Anyways, doing additional data can seem overwhelming for somebody. So obviously, I know that Corral data, it's like there's makes their life easier. But before we get into that, what's something that like med spa owners can do on themselves, maybe even outside of your data, to a few key metrics to look at to start to back into this a little bit, to somewhat dip their toes in the water before they jump all into a corral data?
Yeah, I would say one is like our goal is to just make this entire process easy, super
Mhm.
simple. But if you were to literally just start measuring lifetime value, I think it's very interesting. We don't see usually single practices. They might sort of have like if they're running advertising, they
Yeah.
might have sort of like a semblance of like what is our not customer acquisition cost. They will measure usually cost per appointment,
Hmm.
but they don't back up, well, what is the average percentage rate that actually shows up? So I would say if you could even back up the envelope, just figure out what is your notional rate, and based on this, figure out what is your actual CAC, what is your actual, what is the actual amount you are spending to acquire that appointment, and then I would sort of take it a step further. Well, how many times are people booking appointments that are already customers of yours, or already patients of yours, right? And so, how do we sort of also like one of the things that we've noticed is like how do we delineate that experience? It's like existing patients, new patients, to make sure that you're capturing this so you could understand your true acquisition cost of a new patient. And I think if I was sort of, if I didn't have corral data, that would be the first place I would start. Is I would just literally focus on making sure that my numbers line up on that end,
Hmm.
because I think a lot of times what we're seeing is people are saying, hey, these channels, the marketing is too expensive or it's very unprofitable for us. So they shut off marketing. But the reality is they might actually be turning off the wrong campaigns or the wrong channels.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would venture to say that marketing is the very first place where people cut their budget when times are tough. And that should absolutely be the last place that you cut. I know during COVID, we doubled down because everybody was cutting, and we like increased and actually doubled our ad spend coming out of COVID. And that was very good for our particular business because nobody else was really advertising as aggressively. Um, so for cost for appointments, if you're not, for them watching, if you're not already working with a pay-per-click advertising company, work with one. Like you're in business to be an injector. Like you're not, you can't be all things. I mean, I've been working online since 2007, and I still work with companies because that game is changing so quick that unless you do it full time, you're costing yourself money. Um, they'll be able to back into how much cost you're doing per appointment. Whatever software that you're using, you just contact their customer support if you're not familiar with it. They'll be able to show you how to calculate lifetime value. So most of them have like a report there that just says lifetime value of people last 90 days, as you were saying, Alex. And then you were saying no show rate and like what I call pre-book or rebook. What's the amount of those patients that come in and then rebook again? Because let's say your new patient acquisition cost for easy math is $200, but then only 50% of those ever come back again, which 50% as a new patient rebook rate is a very good rate. Most people it's around 20%. Um, but so if you got 50 of them, then you can start to back into that
Yeah.
math. And
The one,
they could throw all those numbers into Chat GPT also to kind of help them, and Chat GPT will do all the math for them.
yeah, and the one that I really like is sort of the time between first and second booking. And I
Mm,
think that that one is very interesting because you'll sort of, if I look at that by sort of by the provider, it tells a very, very interesting story. So like some of the rebooking obviously happens right then and there on that appointment. Some of it is like, well, let me call you back. And so
yeah.
you might not have that data captured in your EMR system. So like if we are able to just also look at just like the sheer amount of days that
Hmm.
we get, because that is also the highest predictor that we've seen between The highest correlation between LTV is sort of like obviously the time between first and second booking that somebody's coming in. Because if you could get them into a pattern, that is what's going to set you up for success in terms of high LTV customers as well.
That's good. Okay, so now we talked a little bit about the long way. Walk us through, like, if they have corral data and how does that work? How do you pull in all the things? How do you connect all the things? And then what does their dashboard look like? What are some of the numbers that they can see?
Yeah, so we make it as easy as possible. So for most platforms like the Google Analytics, Google Ads, Meta Ads, it's one-click integration. So it's just press a button, you authorize it, it's good to go. For something like, let's say like a Zenoti or one of the other EMR platforms, we walk you through where do you grab the API key, you drop the API key in, and once you drop that API key in and all of your data starts syncing, once the data is done syncing, we essentially give you out-of-the-box reporting. So based on what we believe you should be looking at based on sort of your practice, right? So if you're running a larger practice, multi-location practice, and you have call tracking data, it might look a little bit different than another practice. If you also are selling product, it might look a little bit different. If you have memberships, it might look a little bit different. But essentially what the platform does is it figures out based on all of the sources of data you connected, the type of practice that you run, what you should look at on day one. And what we recommend you look at on day one is not going to be the same as day 2 or day 30, but it's a really good starting point for you to see, like, this is what sort of the wisdom of the crowds, like customers on our platform, this is what they look at, right? And so that's a starting point. And then everybody has their own nuances to their business. They might be paying commissions to certain injectors one way. They might be doing so. What we also allow you to do is very similar. You mentioned ChatGPT, very similar to ChatGPT model. Let me update my reporting by talking to my data, by asking it to update this report. We also have an onboarding team to help as well. The goal is your business has your own nuances. How do we make sure that that gets captured so the reporting that you're looking at reflects how you think about your business, how you think about your KPIs, but it also has what we believe you should care about to really manage your business, and it has all of that reporting in there. That's one piece of it. And then the second piece of it is, once you sit on all of this data, yes, you might send somebody an email that says, hey, let's change our scheduling on this, let's change our campaigns, let's do this or that. What it also does is it allows you to act on that data, act on that platform data. So you might have heard of this concept in e-commerce called CDP, or customer data platform. In MedSpas, this is a little bit different because we're dealing with HIPAA compliance, so we're dealing with data. So we can't just send, hey, this patient has a high LTV, go find me more patients like this. But what we can send is, hey, these clicks that you sent us, we want you to find us more clicks that are similar to these clicks. So we could also you could also use Corral data to what we call this reverse ETL, to send that data back to the ad platforms in a HIPAA compliant way to say, give me more patients that look like this.
So basically you can use Corral data to create lookalike audiences. Is that what I'm hearing?
You can use it to create lookalike audiences. You could also use it to create conversion events in all of your ad platforms as well. So all of this you could do without having to download patient files onto your computer, like without having to break any HIPAA, without having any HIPAA violations as well.
Yeah. So, okay. So as I already said, my wife and I, we own a MedSpa. Like, if we were to get Corral data and then I link all the things, I see the dashboard, what are some typical things that you see, typical actionable steps that me as a MedSpa owner would do after seeing that data that would start to turn around the profitability? Because right now it seems like, all right, it helps you adjust the campaigns, and then you have some cool knowledge as far as like, oh, here's the lifetime value against marketing, so maybe I increase my budget and I create that lookalike audience. But like, what else could I do?
I would say that if your focus is profitability, I would venture that by also having all of the cost data, not just sort of like revenue or LTV data, you could see the profitability of every single patient, of every single employee, of every single ad campaign, and you could then start to optimize against it. So it's not just sort of like, hey, I want to spend more money here. It's, what do you want to spend more money on? Sort of like, what are the levers that you have to really grow the practice? And what we've seen, it's either the owners or private equity groups that are really obsessing over this. They could really scale by just being very meticulous and sort of like having a plan that we essentially are able to generate. Very like, hey, these are the critical things that we need to get off the ground. What also, if you're working with an agency for, let's say, marketing, usually you would add your agency to corral data so they could also have access to the paid media reporting portion of it. So, and maybe if you're working with operations, you would give them access to other things. So like, you empower people to do this. You set goals right within the platform. You have you could chat right within the platform to communicate with your team and your agencies. The goal is for data to become sort of the central way that you're making decisions versus relying on gut.
Yeah, I've done this all the time too, with our other businesses. I'm like, I feel like this is the best direction, or like, I feel like this isn't working. And really, when you hear yourself saying that, for the most part, that's wrong, unless you're headed into like just uncharted territories where you do have to feel, but you should be making decisions based on actual data. And one of the things I did at our spa last week is I just sat in the lobby the whole day and I just took notes on every patient that came in, every patient that went out, how the provider handed them off, how they greeted them, how the person, because I was just acquiring data of like, what is that customer experience like? I noticed some providers when they was checking out people like, okay, like, thank you, so good to see you, and pat them on the arm. But then other providers didn't. And then on the newer patients, they didn't touch them, but on the returning patients, they did. I was like, oh, that's just interesting. But those things allows me to shape a customer experience that's going to help set apart the med spa from other med spas in the area, because they're, again, so many. And if you could couple something like that with like this data where every dollar you deploy could, in essence, bring you an ROI because you now have the data, you don't have to feel your way through it anymore. And really, that it reduces stress, because that's, I mean, as a business owner, you don't want to lose money. And so by having something like this, you'd be like, oh, okay, this has a track record. Let's just spend more here and then watch the growth happen. So that's it's a really cool tool. All right. So I know that we talked about doing it the long way, the old fashioned way. And realistically, unless you're able to pull it all together, it's just, most people, it's just not going to happen unless you're a data scientist. And, you're not. But like, how does AI, because AI is incorporated in all this, how does AI help with this? And how do you leverage AI to help the average person analyze this data?
Yeah, and maybe I should take a step back in terms of if you're a data scientist, I think it would still be hard, because you not only need to be a data scientist, you also need to be a data engineer or an API engineer, because the EMR systems for the med spa industry are typically very challenging to work with. So I think the other issue, it's not like using sort of like a Google Data Studio or something like this, because yes, maybe you can pull in some ad platform data and build some things yourself. I think the other challenge is like, how do you integrate EMR platforms into this and make it all work together? So like, to answer your sort of to answer your question of just like pulling this all together, if like, even if you're, I think it would be very challenging to do even if you were a data scientist. How AI helps us is, every single time there is a new API documentation, our platform is keenly aware of every single data point that we can pull from every single EMR system, but also some of our customers are also integrating HubSpot and Salesforce and everything else. So AI helps us in a few areas. The first area is agentic model to understand every single API that is connected to our platform to make sure that we can take advantage of any question that is being asked that we can reasonably answer because we have the API availability for it. That's the first
Yeah.
piece of it. The second piece that AI helps us with is it figures out every single report you should look at based on your type of business and the sources of data that you're connected. So if you were to build this yourself, like without using AI, or if we were to do this without using AI, it would be like a very sort of like standard kind of approach, and everyone gets the same dashboards and this is your template, but every single business is different. So that's the other place where AI really helps us, is build reports really quickly for customers. Third place is modifying those reports. So in the every single widget, every single report is a SQL query. We don't expect any MedSpa owners, operators, or PE companies to learn how to use SQL. But our AI can modify that SQL by you just chatting with it. So that's the other place. And then the last piece of it is just being able to chat with your data. So AI, very similar to ChatGPT, allows you to chat with all of your MedSpa data and ask it any questions you could possibly ask. Ask about what happened, what will happen, what is the correlation, because it has access to your data, and it can write the code necessary to be able to do this.
You could probably even do hypotheticals like, what do I need? How much money do I need to spend on marketing to increase my revenue by $100,000 this year? And then, and probably tell you like, okay, well, deploy X amount on this, and the ripple effect should be that.
Yeah, with some caveats. Anytime we're doing predictions, though, if we don't have statistical significance, we caveat it pretty aggressively to make sure somebody isn't mortgaging their house to like
double down.
Let's go. So like we give you a ton of warnings along the way if you do decide to do something like that. But yes, like, or if you have enough data and we are very confident in this, we might not give you as many caveats along the way.
One of my mentors, he said, always be more concerned about the return of your investment than the return on your investment. So like, don't put it all on black, So, all right. So leave us with two things. Leave us with what's your number one piece of advice for people just getting started in this data world to make it less overwhelming, because most of our people are very new business owners. And then secondly, how can they find out more about Corral data? Like, where should they go to discover that?
So on the first one, I would say like so many times you could just ask one question that will drastically change the trajectory of your business in your sign-up form. Just ask people how they heard about you. Because I think a lot of times, yes, you might sort of say, we use Google Analytics and we're capturing all of this. How many times are you actually logging into anything to actually check it out? Just ask that simple question, make sure that that appears on your forms, because the chances are, especially if you're running a smaller practice, you're probably seeing every single form field that comes in. So add that question to make sure that you are asking somebody how, and a lot of times you're getting this from a referral, this patient recommended, right? Things that would never be surfaced just by pure click tracking. So has nothing to do with Corral, has nothing to do with like typical data analytics, but one simple question, add this to your form. The amount of insight it will give you will be phenomenal. In terms of how to find out more about us, corraldata.com. That's it. It's that simple. We have a ton of resources for med spas, or you could email me, alex@corraldata.com.
Awesome. Thanks, Alex, for your time and all your advice.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.